ABC Central Coast. And Rob Manning is a local bloke who has someone else's liver that's going really well. I'm glad you didn't get mine, Rob, because it's probably been used up a bit too much with the old beers. But he's off to the World Transplant Games in April to be held in Perth, and is very keen for legislative change and working with our decision makers to make organ donation easier. He's playing golf and doubles tennis. G'day, Rob.
G'day. How you doing, Scott?
How you hitting him, mate?
Mate, I think I said to you after I got out of surgery that I'm hitting the ball straighter than ever. I have to slow my swing right down. And so now the ball comes straight down the fairway, and it's making the game of golf a lot more enjoyable because there's less push bashing.
You might have got Jack Newton's liver.
Well, they say that you sometimes take on the traits of the person who, donated your second chance, so perhaps.
It was a great golf, a great bloke. Yeah, fantastic stuff. And how's it going? How's the transplant taking? There's no graft versus host or problems like that?
I have been the luckiest bloke alive, and since talking to you, there's not a single day has gone past that I haven't felt 100%. And I'm living on the Central Coast. I'm doubly lucky because obviously where we live, but also too we've had two great local MPs in David Meehan and Adam Crouch, and I was listening before about Adam and his struggle down in Terrigal to scrape back in, but both of those gentlemen listened to my story last year, and they helped me establish the first Friends of Parliament group in the New South Wales Parliament for organ and tissue donation and transplant awareness, the oldest parliament in Australia, and it took those two blokes, one from red and one from blue, to set up a non-partisan group where we had 30 MPs come along and say we need some changes in the legislation. So just doubly blessed.
What a good story. It's 14 to 8 ABC Central Coast. If we had more of that bipartisan stuff, we'd get a lot more done. Do it for the good of the people, and good on Mr. Crouch and Mr. Meehan for putting aside the political differences to make a difference in a very important area. And it's still too hard, I think. I don't know, you know it a lot more closely, but I've always thought, and I think most people do, that just ticking a box on the licence like they do in many other countries still should be the way to go. Will that ever happen in Australia?
Look, Scott, the issue is not whether you register or not, and it sounds wrong, but at the end of the day, like any procedure in hospital, if you're not able to make a decision for yourself at the point before your surgery or whatever it is, your next of kin take control. So when you pass away, even if you're a registered donor or if you're not a registered donor, if you appear to be a potential donor, one of the 1,300 in Australia and only a couple of hundred here in New South Wales, who die in the most peculiar circumstances, I always say I was the luckiest bloke alive and the person who passed away was the unluckiest bloke, because remember, to be a deceased donor, you've got to be dead. And that's the key that we all struggle with. The next of kin are the people who are responsible for saying yes. So when the doctors go to the 1,300 people who are identified as potential donors, 701 families said yes and 599 families said no. And it's at that moment that you have to understand they're at their lowest point of grief, and they may not have known that the person wanted to be an organ donor. So the first time they hear about it is, I'll use my name. Scott, you come in to see how I was after the accident or the fall, and they say, Scott, unfortunately, Rob's not going to make it home. His mortal journey's come to an end. He was an organ donor, and he can save other lives. Are you ready? And after I tell you that Rob's not coming home, you stop listening, because you're dealing with the grief. And it's the education before we get into an emergency department or ICU that needs to change. We need to be honest with families and say, it's great to tick a box, but the reality is you have to talk to your family and tell them what your wishes were, because they're the ones who will be forced into a situation where they have to say yes or no. Sadly, nearly 3/4 of the people who say no, a couple of days later regret that and say, I wish I'd said yes. So we don't have the counselling in place to support the donor families through the grief of either saying yes or no. That's got to change. So we've got to support donor families. And I want to see the introduction of a deceased donor register or a role that says, Rob saved 3 lives. Rob is a hero. When somebody, as I said, there were only 454 people in Australia who donated organs last year. So I know how lucky I was to get one that matched, the one that's been so good. So they're the sort of changes I'm pushing for, and as I said, very lucky on the Central Coast to have David Meehan and Adam Crouch as the co-chairs of that Friends of Parliament group.
Rob, no wonder you're a man on a mission. On a lighter note, if we're using that scenario where you've sadly shuffled off, and I need an organ, could you get a second-hand liver? I mean, could it go around again?
Yeah, there are stories of where that's happened, where a donor, is somebody who had received a transplant, and it's amazing. I was at a Transplant Australia camp in the lead up to the World Games, which are in Perth in a couple of weeks, and there was a story of a lady that had her liver for 40 years, her kidney for 40 years, and the kidney had come from a 70-year-old. So the kidney was 110 years old, and you think about that.
Wow.
And the kidney is older than the person that's in. And you're never too old to be a donor. That's the
Does your liver regenerate a bit?
The new one does. The old one didn't. That was my problem. I had an autoimmune condition. You talked about having a beer. It's okay to have a drink because normally your liver will repair itself. You see detox liver programs and all those sorts of things. Yeah. I had an autoimmune condition that meant that every drink I had was a death sentence. I wish I'd known that when I was 20. If I'd known I had that sort of condition, and it's not easy to find, it's very rare. I was just one of the unlucky ones. But as I said, I got so lucky when everything went catastrophically wrong, it went miraculously right. And at a time when another family was suffering grief, they had the compassion and kindness and selflessness to say yes. And that's what I want to encourage more families at a barbecue or at a golf game. If you're going around in a four, have a chat to the other three in your group and just say, what would you do if you were ever in a situation where a loved one had lost their life and they were in a situation where they could donate? Would you say yes or no? Because if you think about it before, when you get confronted in that emergency department or ICU, you might say yes. But if you haven't heard about it before, there's a big chance you'll probably say no. And I always say, prepare for it, talk about it, and then hope it never it never happens, so that you never get asked. But as a family, if you talk about it and say, if it ever happens, I know I'd say yes, and then you pray that you'll never be asked.
Yeah, great point. So talk about it in the family and do the paperwork as well. Tick the boxes. And where have you been hitting the golf ball, Rob? Where have you been chasing the little white ball?
I've played down Woi Woi, Jelly. I played. Went up to Mangrove Mountain and had a hit there. That's a hilly course.
You need one leg. You need one leg shorter than the other to play there.
Or a goat to take your clubs around. I tell you what. But it was a great course. We ended up 3 under par. It was with my handicap, of course. I couldn't do it by myself.
What are you off, Rob? What are you off?
Well, the sad part is I lost my handicap, but so I'm running off 28. But when you hit 25 over off the stick after 1 year after surgery, I think I'm doing all right.
You're doing all right. All right, Rob. We'll keep in touch and cheer you on at the World Transplant Games. Thanks for the update. And it was really a nice little story about Adam Crouch and David Meehan. Getting together on this.
The Central Coast. It's a beautiful place to live, and we've got wonderful people up here. So
yeah, that's good stuff. Thank you, Rob. We'll follow your games over there with interest.
Thank you.
Keep us in the loop. We might see if we can get a photo of Rob in action to put it up online. Off to the World Transplant Games in April, thanks to a family who consented to let their loved one's liver go to Rob and given him a new lease of life. It's a great story. It's 7 to 8 ABC Central Coast 1300 925 222